Breaking news out of the United States, with the New York Times reporting that Donald Trump pressured Prime Minister Scott Morrison to help the US Attorney General investigate the origins of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia inquiry.
Live now to our political reporter Trudy McIntosh in Canberra. Trudy, it's a pretty explosive story from the New York Times. First of all, take us through what the story says.
All right, so Laura, the New York Times put this story up about 40 minutes ago, and it reports that the president pressured Scott Morrison to help investigate the origins of the Mueller report, a Mueller inquiry, which you obviously remember Donald Trump has got quite the focus on, given it surrounds his conduct. So in a recent phone call, the New York Times reports that Scott Morrison was asked to help Attorney General Barr get information. And the reason why Australia is being called on to take action here is because it centres on a meeting that Alexander Downer, the former foreign minister, and had with George Papadopoulos. He's a Trump campaign advisor. In May 2016, the pair met in London, and it was there that George Papadopoulos raised the idea that they had Russian dirt on Hillary Clinton. So this is why Australia is being asked to be involved. The New York Times then goes into details about how this call is similar to the Ukrainian call that we've seen so much reporting on over the past week or so. It's causing quite a few headaches for Donald Trump, as you know, Laura, and the centre of the impeachment kind of push that we're seeing now by the House Democrats.
And what's Mr Downer said, if anything, this morning, Trudy?
Well, Alexander Downer was coincidentally on ABC Radio a short time ago due to talk about something else, but given the breaking news on this, he was asked, does he know any more about this? And he says that he's got nothing more to say about it and that he's not privy to other conversations that Scott Morrison would have had with the president. So not shedding much more light than what we already know there.
Yeah, it doesn't seem so. And look, Alexander Downer has been reluctant to go into his involvement in the origins of this Russia probe. Scott Morrison is obviously now at the centre of this from our perspective. Has there been any response from his office this morning?
Well, the Prime Minister's office remaining quiet on this today. When I spoke to them, they said they don't have any comment at this stage on this story. But it is worth remembering, Laura, you were there on this trip, that Scott Morrison was asked in a doorstop the day after that Oval Office meeting, the 21st of September, by a journalist. They said if he had had any discussion around documents being declassified relating to Alexander Downer and that meeting in London. He was asked, did that come up at all? And the Prime Minister's words were, well, I'm not going to go into private conversations. He went on to talk about, they spoke about defence and security, and then he said these were not issues that were there for discussion. So indicating at least that day there hadn't been conversations with Mr Trump regarding this. But that's not to say, because the New York Times is reporting that this was done in recent weeks as a phone call. It may have been done. We're just not clear on the timeline here, whether it was before the Washington visit or whether it has been subsequent to that.
Yeah, Trudy, it's interesting that there's some comments that Donald Trump made in May, and they're being carried by the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, so I'm reading off it at the moment. But there's this quote from Donald Trump, and this is in reference to Attorney General William Barr. Trump says he can look, and I hope he looks at the UK, and I hope he looks at Australia, and I hope he looks at Ukraine. I hope he looks at everything, because there was a hoax that was perpetrated on our country. I mean, realistically, what can Alexander Downer do, or what can Scott Morrison do?
Well, I think he might be under some pressure, given the close nature of the relationship that the two have, to provide some additional detail. But you can imagine Scott Morrison would be reluctant to get into such a partisan political fight in the United States. We know this is a red-hot issue in terms of domestic American politics. The Mueller probe has been such a lightning rod for both sides. You'd imagine that the Prime Minister would be reluctant to try and weigh into any of this.
Yeah, I think so, Trudy. And look, we don't know the timeline of all of this, but to distill it down, it would be essentially asking Scott Morrison, wouldn't it, to investigate itself or investigate Alexander Downer, and that investigation, even initiating it, would suggest that Alexander Downer did the wrong thing. So, look, there's no suggestion that Morrison has acquiesced to that request. There's no suggestion, there's been no inkling that Australia would launch any kind of investigation, would there?
No, that's right. And I think it must be remembered that Australia at the time would have thought that they were acting in the United States' best interest by passing on this information to the United States. It was done privately behind closed doors. It's only subsequently been reported that this is what actually occurred with Alexander Downer. We didn't telegraph that this had happened at the time. So, as you said, it might be that the government would be reluctant, you'd imagine, here to try and investigate itself. That would be kind of an admission that they believed Alexander Downer did something wrong in that meeting.
Yeah.